this roster as well. It's still, a race for the roster in terms of next year's either 23 or 26 man World Cup squad. There's no real clarity on who's going to be on this team, and we've got some roster questions coming up. But what formation do you think this team plays at the World Cup? Because maybe this 4-2-2 isn't the way to go for this Canadian team. And we took a look at some potential other formations, in particular with maybe a three at the back and Johnston as a right wing back with Davies on the other side. Because maybe that could open up a few attacking options. Then you have, Bombito, Defuja Rolls, Cornelius backline. Is that something that you'd look at moving forward, or do you think this 4-2-2 is to stay?
Yeah, well, I think one thing important to remember with formation discussions is, especially in modern football, no, it's rare you have a team with one true formation. Everyone has a formation. They attack, they defend, sometimes they switch. So I think for Canada, the 4-2 base isn't going to go away. That's how they defend, and they defend very well in that 4-2. Where I wonder is, are they going to be in a 3-1 or a 2-2? Is it going to be the 4-2-2 or the 4-2-3-1? I think those are the only two changes I could see. From there, they build up in a 3-2-5. They've built up in a 3-2-5 since Jesse Marsh has come. What I would see, though, is we've seen a lot of whoever the right back is, Alistair Johnson mostly, but also Nico Seeger, tuck in and back three. The point that we thought in the discussion we were having is Johnston is a legitimate threat. Like, this guy had almost a dozen assists for Celtic this year. Incredible at just going up the line, underlapping, overlapping, whipping in crosses, chipping crosses, cutbacks. Alphonso Davies is an asset. And it makes you wonder, if is there a world where one of the midfielders, and you can especially do this if you do the 4-2-3-1, because all of a sudden you have an extra midfielder, you use one of the midfielders to drop in the three. And then that's where you, like you mentioned, Ben, the Johnston wingback, Davies wingback. That's something I would consider, because for a team maybe struggling to create offense as much as they should look at all sources. And I think the service of a Johnston and other wide defenders could also be a way to supplement. And the midfield is one too. And perhaps having a 4-2-3-1 could give that Kone a bit more license that he hasn't had. And we know he can be a difference maker in the right scenarios.
And on this roster as well, some players rose their stock during this tournament. The guys like Nico Sigur, Luke Dufour-Rolls, Nathan Saliba, and some definitely didn't. Jacob Schaffelberg takes the red card in the quarterfinal, and his World Cup stock probably fell among, the likes of Daniel Jebison, Kamal Miller. That's the question from North Van Steven and several others. Who rose their stock in this tournament, and who's went down after the Gold Cup?
Yeah, well, I'll start, and I'm curious to see what you throw back in return. What I would say for Rose, it's a pretty easy list, right? It's Nico Seeger, Luke Defougerol, Nathan Saliba. Those are probably the big three. Otherwise, for me, the guy I had was Richie Larea. I thought he had a fantastic tournament and really has improved his stock. Otherwise, a lot of the guys I think are holding. On the flip side, I think stock who's fallen. I mean, Kamal Miller, we kind of talked about it after Curacao in the crowded center back position. I think another one would be, maybe like a Daniel Jebison, a Kyle Aaron, both of those guys. I'm with you. I loved your Jason Russell Rowe shout earlier. I just see something in him where I feel like he can make a difference at a World Cup. And I think we'll both be banging that drum, having watched a lot of Jason Russell Rowe. So I'd look at those two. And Jacob Schaffelberg, in the sense that all of a sudden, between Ali Ahmed and Tejan Buchanan, Jaden Nelson. I saw a video of Liam Miller back in, training for Hull City as they begin preseason. It's a crowded winger position, and little slip ups as this, as small as they might be, as we know, Jacob Schaffelberg, high character guy who's been very good for Canada in moments. Something like this could hurt his stock in an already competitive winger battle, and every moment helps, as we know.
Yeah, I think when you look at the situation that this Canadian team finds themselves in, Kyle Aaron is the big one that comes to mind, because at one point we were talking about like, oh, he'll be on the roster, but maybe he's not starting in front of Taniolo Asay or Promise David or whoever takes that striker role alongside Jonathan David, or if it's only Jonathan David up top in a single striker system. But now I think the question really has to be, is Kyle Aaron on the 26, let alone 23-man roster? Because I don't know if he serves much of a purpose other than leadership. From a footballing standpoint, he's been poor generally at the club level and definitely with Canada. And it seems like his confidence is at an all-time low, that it maybe isn't, a question that you want around the national team at this point, because maybe there's just asking that question takes up too much space and weight with this team. If you don't have him there and it's Jason Russell Rowe, it's Jonathan David is the leader, and you're kind of questioning about who that second striker is. I know a lot of people want it to be Promise David. I could see it being Jason Russell Rowe or Daniel Jebison even. And of course, Taniela would say he's had that opportunity. But taking Kyle Aaron out of the equation, I think could actually benefit this team psychologically as much as from a footballing standpoint, Alex.
Yeah, well, it had so many layers to that because too, all of a sudden, maybe does that spot go to an extra winger? Does that spot go to an extra midfielder? Does that spot go to the next high potential youngster that's going to come out of nowhere in 12 months and make himself a lock for next year, like we've seen the Ismail Kone, as we'll call it, among other options, the Luke DeFouge role. Because yeah, I think the reality is between national team form, between club form, usually you'd like one of the two, right? To at least throw yourself in the mix. And when you have neither, like he has right now, it's a tough situation to look at, especially have Jason Russell Rowe knocking on the door again. He's the one that I'm really looking at. Granted, I think it helps learn that Daniel Jebison didn't exactly cover himself in glory because that kind of leaves things open where I think it's Jonathan David, Promise David, and Taniela Wase probably interchangeable after this tournament, 2-3. And then number 4, it's hard to say which one between Jebison and Laren showed themselves. But then, like you mentioned, if Russell Rowe comes in and grabs that number 4 spot, it's going to be hard to bring 5 strikers to a World Cup, especially when it felt like Canada, for whatever reason, was, well, they actually, that's wrong. They weren't hesitant to use it for whatever reason. They only liked to use it when it was 3 of them at a time, but that's a whole other story.
And another question from Max Richter as well, on the mentality and motivation around Jesse Marsh's style. His leadership style seems extremely motivating in the short term, but this tournament and the outburst at the Nations League shows that he still needs to develop as a manager. He's still only in his early 50s, so he's still fairly young when it comes to the managerial game, even though he's coached at the top level in the US and England and Germany and Austria. But Canada looked tactically incompetent this tournament, according to Max. When you compare Marsh's style to Herdman's style to what could work for this Canadian men's national team, where do you kind of stand on that?
Yeah, well, I think the reality is, like I mentioned earlier, they've got a very good identity, a good game plan, one that suits the players that they have. And I think that's credit to Marsh to that. It's been a good fit. I don't think you should forget all that because you have one bad game against Guatemala or a bad tournament. But like we mentioned, there are some legitimate, genuine questions, concerns of, is Canada too over aggressive? Do they maybe not respect opponents enough in a certain regard? Okay, there's talk of plan B, C, and all this. What do those plans look like? Does Canada have the pragmatism required that sometimes you need in a knockout game where, say, you're stuck up against France, somehow you get a 1-0 lead, and then you're just dealing a barrage of Mbappe and Dembele and Olise? Will Canada have the pragmatism required to sit back and manage that storm? Those are all legitimate questions because for whatever reason, Canada had good moments with Plan A this tournament. Honduras is the great example for about 10 minutes versus Curacao, 45 minutes versus Guatemala, a 20-minute period against El Salvador. But then there are these legitimate, 70 minutes against Curacao, a good chunk of El Salvador, the second half versus Guatemala, where Plan A didn't appear to work and they kind of seemed out of sorts in that regard. Like, what do I do? How do I adjust? So for them, this coaching staff at large and Jesse Marsh, that's going to be something to watch because ultimately World Cup teams are smart. They're going to adjust. They're going to know what you can do. And I think that's going to need to be the biggest area of development ahead of the World Cup is making it so that Canada has different images. I think I want to be very clear. This Canada should not shift their style. I don't want to mix that up, but you have to be able to show different images as a team. There's so many examples of aggressive front-footed teams that sometimes know how to sit back and absorb 30% possession. And the reality is with Canada, have we seen that? Not enough. And that's something I want to see over the next 12 months because they're going to need to do it at the World Cup. They're not going to be able to play the same way in every game. And that's just football. That's just a reality.
And this tournament was not necessarily a fun one for Canadian fans either. We saw a lot of, outrage online, whether that's towards some of the players, the coaching staff. The question from Oz Sweeney, one of our usual question askers, is hopefully this is a humbling experience for a number of individuals embarrassed by themselves on both sides of the coaching staff and the players. It's going to take a lot of work to rebuild the good vibes. What do you recommend this Canadian team does to get the fans back on side? Because at one point with this team, especially last year at the Copa America, it seemed like they could do no wrong and were immune to any kind of judgment, which they certainly aren't now.
Yeah, I would just start with the word humility. And I wouldn't say that in a bad way, 'cause sometimes you say humility, it implies that there's maybe, a lack of it. But I think just for Canada, in the wake of this, some humility in the sense of, okay, maybe we weren't ready as we thought we were. Maybe we weren't, prepared to make the deep run in the tournament. Because like we mentioned, as the record shows, Canada has maybe not taken that next step yet, and that's okay. Like we mentioned, some teams never take that step. Some teams it just happens overnight. And this Canadian team, it feels like they have enough factors in their favor where it could turn overnight, where they can make a World Cup run. But I think the big thing that fans, I guess, will just want to see is the worst thing you can do in this sport is to be like brash and aggressive and then not back it up, because then that just leaves you in a situation of what were you all talk? And I think with Canada, again, that's not fair to suggest they were, because I think especially this team did a great job. Like in 2023, they were borderline cocky, right? Those were discussions we have of we deserve to win, kings of CONCACAF, all that aged terribly. This team has been good at managing of anytime you've asked them, are they favorites? They don't like to embrace that tag. They haven't wanted to. They know that there's still a lot of growth to do. But now that a defeat like this happens, you almost want to double down with humility. And I think there is that within this group, but that's probably the big thing that I think from a fan's perspective, they'll want to see if that makes sense.
And to wrap up episode 240 here on the Northern Football Podcast, what's your biggest takeaway from this Gold Cup for the Canadian team? Is it a wake up call? Is it learning from, disappointment? Like, what is the tangible takeaway that this team can have coming out of this tournament?
Yeah, you know, that football owes nothing to anyone and that it's not going to be a straight line to the top. So what I would say to, those who feel like the sky is falling down, Canada this won't impact Canada's ability to get results at the World Cup. But they're going to have to recover from this. They're going to have to learn from this. They're going to have to accept what happened, process, do a postmortem, do a report, and move on. And how they do that will tell us everything about how well they will do next summer. So I think a big takeaway is that the sky isn't falling, but that at the same time they maybe weren't as far along as they were in their process, and that's okay. That stuff can take time. So I'm just curious to see what's next, because I think the bounce back will tell everything of where this team can be and what it can be about. Because in the grand scheme of things, if they go make a round of 16 next summer or a quarterfinal, you're gonna forget about Guatemala. It's gonna be a memory of the past. If you get grouped without a win, though, all of a sudden you're gonna be like, "Damn, Guatemala really was the foreshadowing." So, I think the next few months will be telling, and especially leading into next year.